The rain fell in heavy sheets against the windshield as Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his tired eyes fixed on the slick, empty road ahead. It was close to midnight, and the sound of the storm outside echoed the turmoil inside him. His business, the dream he had poured his heart and savings into, was slipping away faster than he could save it. Every phone call he'd made that day ended with the same polite rejection, and the silence that followed each "will be in touch" still rang in his ears. He had mortgaged his small home, sold his car for this old pickup, and even skipped meals to keep the company afloat. Now, with the rain blurring the city lights in his rearview mirror, Daniel couldn't help but wonder if all his efforts had been for nothing. The wiper screeched across the glass, barely keeping up with the downpour, and the gas gauge hovered dangerously close to empty. He sighed deeply, his knuckles white against the wheel, when suddenly something flickered in the beam of his headlights, a figure standing by the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a trick of the rain, maybe a reflection or a shadow, but as he drove closer, he saw her, a young woman, soaked to the skin, holding a small suitcase and waving weakly at the passing cars. Her hair clung to her face, and her clothes were drenched, sticking to her like a second skin. Each car that passed splashed water onto her, but she didn't move, didn't give up. Daniel slowed down instinctively, his heart tightening at the sight. She looked like she had been standing there for hours, her shoulders trembling from the cold. For a moment, he hesitated. It was late, the storm was getting worse, and she was a stranger, but something in her eyes caught him off guard. They were full of exhaustion, fear, and a kind of quiet strength that reminded him of himself. She wasn't just lost. She looked like someone who had been running from something. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 11:47 p.m. He had barely enough fuel to get home. Logic told him to drive on, to let someone else stop, but his conscience wouldn't let him. He slowed the truck to a stop a few feet ahead of her, watching through the side mirror as she hesitated, unsure whether to approach. Rain dripped from his hair as he rolled down the window and leaned toward her, his voice raised above the storm. "You need a ride," he called out. For a second, she didn't respond, just stared at him through the curtain of rain, clutching her suitcase tighter, as if afraid to trust. Then she nodded, her lips trembling as she whispered something he couldn't hear. Daniel unlocked the passenger door and leaned over to push it open. The smell of wet air and earth filled the cabin as the woman climbed in, her clothes dripping onto the seat. She murmured a quiet thank you, barely audible over the storm, and pulled her knees close, shivering. Daniel handed her his jacket, an old worn-out thing, but warm enough. "Here," he said softly. "You'll freeze." She took it hesitantly, her fingers trembling as she wrapped it around herself. He turned the heater up, but the truck barely managed a faint warmth. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic patter of rain. Daniel tried not to stare, but he couldn't help noticing the details. The way she held her suitcase like something precious, the faint bruises on her wrists, the distant look in her eyes. "Where are you headed?" he finally asked, trying to sound casual. She looked down before replying in a quiet voice, "Just away from here." There was something about the way she said it, soft, broken, final, that made his chest tighten. He didn't ask more. He could tell she didn't want to talk. He knew that tone too well. It was the sound of someone who had lost more than they could explain. As they drove through the winding roads, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating her face for a moment. There was elegance in her features, refined, almost out of place in a setting like this. She looked like someone who didn't belong on the side of a highway, drenched and desperate. He wondered who she was, where she came from, and why she was alone in the middle of a storm. The thought crossed his mind that she might be in trouble, maybe running from someone, maybe hiding, but the instinct to protect her overpowered any suspicion. The miles stretched quietly between them. Daniel's thoughts drifted to his own failures, how life could turn upside down without warning. How strangers sometimes crossed paths at the exact moment they needed each other the most. When the rain began to ease, he looked over at her. She had fallen asleep, her head resting lightly against the window, still clutching the suitcase. He smiled faintly. Whatever her story was, she looked peaceful now, as if for the first time in a long while, she felt safe. As the truck rolled through the dark countryside, Daniel didn't know that this chance meeting, a single act of kindness on a stormy night, would soon change both their lives forever. Rain hammered against the truck's roof like 1,000 tiny fists, drowning out the world beyond the fogged windows. Inside, the air was thick with silence, not an uncomfortable one, but the kind that comes when two strangers are unsure of what to say. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, the wipers struggling to keep up with the storm. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the woman, her fingers clutching his old jacket tightly around her shoulders, her suitcase resting by her feet. After several minutes, she spoke in a voice that was calm but tired, introducing herself simply as Lena. The name fit her somehow, soft, simple, but with a hidden strength behind it. She explained that her car had broken down miles away, and she had been walking ever since, hoping someone would stop. Her words carried the weight of exhaustion, yet there was a politeness to her tone, as if she was careful not to inconvenience him. Daniel nodded, glancing at her for a moment. "You're lucky I came by when I did," he said quietly. "This road doesn't see much traffic at night." She gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and murmured, "I guess I am." For a while, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of rain. Daniel tried to make light conversation, asked where she was headed, if there was someone he could call, but her answers stayed vague. "Just away," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the dark road ahead. There was something haunting in her words, something that made him realize she wasn't just talking about a destination. She was running from something, or someone. Still, Daniel didn't press her. He knew what it was like to have things you didn't want to talk about. Her voice, though quiet, carried an educated calmness that didn't match her appearance. The way she spoke, the way she held herself, even while shivering, hinted at a life very different from the one she was living that night. Daniel stole a glance at her when the headlights flashed across her face, pale skin, sharp eyes, lips trembling slightly from the cold. She wasn't wearing makeup, but there was a kind of grace in her simplicity. Then he noticed something odd. She had no phone, no bag other than the small, worn leather suitcase on her lap. When she reached for a napkin from the dashboard to wipe her face, the sleeve of her blouse lifted slightly, revealing a small bruise on her wrist. Daniel's stomach tightened, but he said nothing. Everyone had secrets, and hers seemed buried deep. When they passed under a flickering gas station sign, he noticed her wallet peeking out of the suitcase. It looked expensive once, but now it was scratched and faded. He could see the corner of a photo tucked inside, but no ID, no cards, nothing to tell who she really was. After nearly an hour, the rain showed no signs of slowing, and Daniel could feel his eyes growing heavy. The dashboard clock blinked 12:32 a.m. "You must be freezing," he said gently. She turned toward him, her voice soft. "A little, but thank you." Her words were kind, but her expression distant, like someone who had been through too much to show emotion easily. Daniel spotted a faint glow in the distance, a small diner, its neon sign flickering open through the storm. "We'll stop there," he said. "You need something warm to eat." She hesitated for a moment, almost as if she was afraid to be seen, then nodded quietly. The diner was nearly empty, with only the faint hum of an old jukebox filling the air. The smell of coffee and fried food lingered. Daniel guided her to a booth near the corner, where the light was soft and warm. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, took one look at Lena and hurried to bring a blanket and a mug of hot chocolate. "Poor thing," she said, shaking her head. "Storm's been rough tonight." Lena wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, her hands trembling slightly as she held the cup. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time, Daniel saw a hint of relief in her eyes. They sat quietly as the rain tapped against the diner windows. Daniel ordered soup for both of them, though he wasn't hungry. He watched her take small, careful sips, as if she hadn't eaten in days. "You don't owe me anything," he said finally, breaking the silence. "I just couldn't leave someone out there." She looked up at him, surprised by his kindness, and for the first time, a real smile appeared on her face. "Most people would have," she said softly, "but you didn't." There was something in the way she said it, a mix of gratitude and disbelief, that made Daniel realize she wasn't used to kindness. When they finished, Daniel offered to drive her to the next town where she could rest, but she shook her head. "Just a little further," she said. "I'll know when we're there." Her words were mysterious, but Daniel didn't argue. As they stepped back into the storm, she pulled his jacket tighter around herself. He saw something change in her eyes, not fear, but quiet determination, as though she had made a choice that night. He didn't know it yet, but this small act of compassion, a warm meal, a ride, a simple kindness, would soon lead him to discover a truth that would shake everything he thought he knew about her, and about fate itself. The soft hum of the diner's neon sign flickered against the rain-streaked windows, casting a faint blue glow across the empty tables. The air smelled of coffee, wet asphalt, and comfort, the kind of place where tired travelers found brief shelter from the storm. Daniel sat across from Lena in the corner booth, the warmth from their mugs slowly replacing the chill that had clung to them. For a long time, neither spoke. The waitress had already refilled their coffee twice, and the sound of thunder had faded into the distance. It was Lena who finally broke the silence. She looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim as she said quietly, "I left home because I couldn't breathe there anymore." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the storm she carried inside. Daniel leaned back slightly, giving her space to continue. "Everything in my life was about money, how much we had, how much we could make, how much people wanted from me. It's like no one cared who I really was." She paused, staring out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. "Sometimes," she murmured, "you have to lose everything to find peace." Daniel didn't respond right away. He knew that feeling, that quiet, suffocating sense of failure, of not being seen for who you are, but for what you can offer. "I understand," he said softly after a moment. "You're not the only one trying to escape something." She looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "You too." He nodded, his lips curling into a tired smile. "Yeah, I had this idea, this dream of building something honest, something that mattered. But it turns out, in business, honesty doesn't pay very well." His attempt at humor drew a faint chuckle from her, the first real sound of laughter that had escaped her all night. Encouraged, he went on, "I've been working for years to keep my small company alive. I've lost investors, friends, even my car once, but I just can't give up on it. It's all I have left." Lena watched him closely, her eyes softening. "You're different," she said after a while. "You talk about your failures like they're just part of the story, not the end of it." Daniel shrugged, glancing down at the cracks in the old table. "Maybe, because that's what they are, just chapters. You don't stop reading a book because one chapter's hard." She smiled at that, her fingers tapping against the coffee cup in thought. "My father used to say that," she whispered, but he forgot what it meant. Her voice wavered slightly at the mention of her family, but she quickly hid it behind a sip of coffee. As the minutes turned into hours, their conversation deepened. They spoke about everything, childhood dreams, regrets, moments they wished they could change. Daniel told her about the time he almost gave up, how his mother's faith in him was the only thing that kept him going. Lena, in turn, shared how she had been trapped in a world of endless expectations, where kindness was a weakness and freedom a luxury. "I just wanted to be seen as a person," she said quietly, her gaze distant. "Not a title, not a last name, Daniel nodded, his voice gentle. Sounds like you've been living surrounded by people, but still alone. She looked at him then, really looked, and her eyes glistened under the soft diner light. Yes, she said simply. Exactly that. At one point, the waitress came by again, smiling softly as she placed another slice of pie on the table. On the house, she said. You two look like you've had a long night. Lena smiled back, a hint of warmth returning to her face. She shared the pie with Daniel, teasing him lightly about his terrible jokes and the way he stirred his coffee too much. The tension between them melted away, replaced by a quiet comfort, the rare kind that happens when two souls recognize each other's loneliness. By the time they finished talking, the clock above the counter read 3:15 a.m. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside washed clean and silent. When Daniel reached for the bill, Lena quickly stopped him. At least let me pay, she said, reaching into her coat pocket. But Daniel shook his head with a faint grin. No way. If I let you pay, then I'd have to admit you're the grown-up here. She laughed softly, rolling her eyes. You're impossible. He smiled. That's what everyone says, right before they realize I'm right. They left the diner together, stepping into the cool, damp air. The clouds had broken apart, and the first faint streaks of dawn colored the horizon. Daniel walked her to the truck, his jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. As they climbed in, Lena glanced at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude? Sadness? Maybe both. Thank you, she said softly, her voice almost lost in the whisper of the wind. For the coffee, and for listening. Daniel smiled, starting the engine. Hey, that's what people are supposed to do, right? She didn't answer, just looked out at the road ahead, her hand tightening slightly around the handle of her suitcase. And though neither of them said it aloud, both could feel it. This night was far from over, and fate still had something waiting for them beyond the next turn of the road. The sun was just beginning to rise when Daniel's truck rolled into the quiet town, its tired engine humming softly after hours of driving through the storm. The sky had cleared, leaving behind streaks of gold and pink that stretched across the horizon. Lena sat beside him, silent, her fingers twisting around the handle of her small suitcase. The calm of morning felt strange after the chaos of the night, almost too peaceful, like the world had paused to catch its breath. Daniel stole a glance at her as he slowed down near a crossroads. Her face looked different in the daylight, calm, but distant, as though she were bracing herself for something she didn't want to face. You sure this is where you want me to drop you off? He asked quietly. She nodded, pointing toward a long, winding road lined with iron gates at the end. Yes, she said softly. Just up there. Her voice had changed, not nervous like before, but measured, careful. Daniel frowned slightly, but said nothing. He turned the truck toward the gate, the tires crunching on the wet gravel. As they approached, he noticed the gates were enormous, too big for an ordinary house. Beyond them stood a sprawling estate, surrounded by manicured gardens and tall oak trees. The kind of place he had only ever seen in magazines or television shows. Before he could ask, two security guards appeared, their dark uniforms crisp, even in the early morning light. They ran toward the vehicle, one of them speaking urgently into a headset. Daniel slowed to a stop, confused, and looked at Lena. She didn't move. Her hand rested on the door handle, but she made no effort to open it. Then, one of the guards shouted her name, her full name. Miss Lena Hartwell. Thank heavens you're safe. The words echoed in the still air, and Daniel froze. He blinked, the name sinking into his mind like a stone. Hartwell. He'd heard that name before. It wasn't just familiar, it was famous. The Hartwell family owned one of the largest business empires in the country. Their faces were often in the news, their parties on magazine covers. And if he remembered right, there had been a headline just 2 days ago. Billionaire's daughter missing after charity gala dispute. His gaze shifted slowly toward Lena, his thoughts spinning. She wasn't just some lost traveler. She was that Lena, the one reporters were searching for. The one everyone thought had been kidnapped, or worse. The guards surrounded the truck now, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. "Miss Hartwell, we've been looking everywhere for you," one said breathlessly. "Your father's been worried sick." "The police," but Lena held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Please," she said quietly, "give me a moment." Her calm authority silenced them instantly. She turned back to Daniel, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw her not as the frightened woman from the roadside, but as someone who carried the weight of a different world, a world built on power and expectations. "I didn't lie to you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I just didn't tell you everything." Daniel didn't know what to say. A part of him felt foolish, another part angry, but mostly he was stunned. The woman who had shared coffee with him at a roadside diner, who had spoken about loss and loneliness, was the daughter of a billionaire. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" he asked finally, his voice low. She smiled sadly, her eyes glistening. "Because I needed to know what kindness felt like, not toward my name, not toward my money, but toward me." Her voice cracked slightly, and Daniel felt the anger slip away, replaced by understanding. He remembered her words from the night before, how she had said people around her only cared about wealth, not love. Now he understood just how deeply she had meant it. The guard stood awkwardly nearby, clearly unsure whether to step in. Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small white card. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed it into Daniel's hand. "If you ever need help," she whispered, her tone sincere and heavy with meaning, "call this number." He looked down at the card, simple, elegant, embossed with the words Hartwell Foundation in gold. When he looked back up, she was already stepping out of the truck. The guards moved to escort her toward the gates, their voices respectful but hurried. Daniel sat there, frozen, watching her walk away through the sunlight breaking over the estate. She paused once and turned back, her eyes meeting his across the distance. For a fleeting moment, the woman who had sat beside him all night was back. No titles, no fortune, just Lena. She mouthed the words "thank you" before disappearing behind the gates. As the heavy iron doors closed with a slow, echoing clang, Daniel stared down at the card in his hand. The world suddenly felt bigger, stranger, as if fate had just played a quiet trick on him. He started the engine, the truck rumbling to life, and drove away without looking back. But even as the mansion disappeared in his rearview mirror, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their story, that a single night of kindness had tied their worlds together in a way neither of them fully understood yet. A week had passed since Daniel had dropped Lena Hartwell at the gates of her grand estate, yet her memory lingered like a quiet song in the back of his mind. The world around him hadn't changed. His small office still smelled faintly of dust and coffee. The flickering fluorescent light above still buzzed with that same dull hum, and the papers scattered across his desk still carried numbers that didn't add up. The only thing that felt different was the heaviness in his chest. He had returned to his routine, but the moment he'd watched her walk through those iron gates kept replaying in his mind her words, her quiet dignity, the way she had thanked him not for saving her, but for seeing her. He had never met anyone quite like her. Now, as he sat behind his worn-out desk, the storm outside his window reminded him of the one from that night. The rain tapped softly against the glass, as if echoing the ticking of the clock on the wall, counting down the last hours of his business. On the desk lay a foreclosure notice, printed in bold black ink. It stated what he had known for weeks, but refused to accept his company was officially bankrupt. His small team had already left. There were no more orders, no more clients, and the bank would soon claim what was left of his dream. Daniel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, the exhaustion weighing heavier than the silence in the room. His phone sat beside him, silent, lifeless. He thought about calling someone, a friend, maybe, or one of the old investors, but he had done that too many times already. No one answered anymore. His eyes drifted to a corner of the desk, where a single white card sat untouched. Hartwell Foundation, private line. He picked it up slowly, tracing his thumb over the gold letters. He remembered Lena's eyes as she had handed it to him, warm, sincere, almost pleading. If you ever need help, call this number. He had laughed it off at the time, assuming it was something polite people said when they parted ways. But now, in the quiet desperation of his failing world, those words seemed to echo louder. Still, he hesitated. Calling her felt wrong somehow. He didn't want her to think he had helped her for gain. He didn't want to be like the people she said had surrounded her all her life, the ones who only cared about her name. But the truth was harsh and unforgiving. He had nothing left to lose. With a deep breath, Daniel reached for the phone and dialed the number, each beep of the keypad echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. For a moment, there was only static, and he thought maybe the line was dead. Then a calm, professional voice answered, "Hartwell Foundation. How may I assist you?" His throat tightened. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said quietly. "Miss Hartwell gave me this number. She told me to call if I ever needed help." There was a brief pause on the other end, followed by a tone of recognition. "Please hold, Mr. Carter," the voice said, polite and efficient. Daniel waited, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours. His mind raced with doubt. Maybe she wouldn't remember him. Maybe she was just being kind that night. He was about to hang up when the voice returned. "Mr. Carter, Miss Hartwell has been informed. Please remain available. We'll be sending a representative to your office shortly." Before he could even respond, the line disconnected. He sat there in stunned silence, unsure whether to believe it. The rain had stopped now, and the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting pale light through the dirty window. An hour passed, then another. He had almost convinced himself it was a misunderstanding when a black car pulled up outside. Two people stepped out, a woman in a formal suit and a man carrying a briefcase. They entered his office with professional grace, introducing themselves as representatives of the Hartwell Foundation. "Miss Hartwell sends her regards," the woman said with a polite smile. "She asked us to review your company's situation." Daniel blinked, unable to speak. The man opened the briefcase, revealing a stack of documents and a check placed neatly on top. "Miss Hartwell has decided to invest in your business under our development fund," he explained. "She believes in what you're doing." Daniel stared at the check, his hands trembling slightly as he read the amount. It wasn't just enough to save his company. It was enough to rebuild it entirely. Attached to it was a small, handwritten note in neat, familiar writing. "Thank you for treating me like a person, not a name. You reminded me what kindness means." He felt a lump form in his throat as he read the words again and again, his eyes blurring with tears. For the first time in years, he let himself cry, not out of defeat, but out of gratitude. That day marked a new beginning. With the Hartwell Foundation's help, Daniel's company grew, but more importantly, so did his purpose. He created opportunities for struggling small businesses, offering them the same hope he had once needed. Whenever someone asked about his sudden success, he would only smile and say, "It started with a ride and a cup of coffee." He never bragged, never took credit, because deep down, he knew it wasn't luck or skill that had saved him. It was compassion, the simple, powerful kind that had passed from one stranger to another on a stormy night. From that day forward, Daniel made it his mission to pass it on, believing with all his heart that sometimes the richest hearts truly belong to those who have the least.